The thunder rolled across the prairie like a warning as Issac Xander pulled his duster tighter around his broad shoulders, squinting through the first heavy drops of rain at the small church on the edge of North Platte, Nebraska. Something had caught his eye, a flash of movement, perhaps, or a muffled sound carried on the wind. Whatever it was, it made him rein in his chestnut gelding and dismount carefully, his boots sinking slightly into the mud as lightning illuminated the darkening sky of 1878. The rain came down harder as Issac approached the weathered wooden structure, his spurs jingling softly with each cautious step. He'd been riding for 3 days straight from Cheyenne, hoping to outrun both the storm and the memories that haunted him. At 32, he'd seen enough violence and heartache to last several lifetimes, and North Platte was supposed to be his fresh start. What he hadn't expected was to find himself investigating mysterious movements behind a church during a thunderstorm. "Hello," he called out, his voice nearly drowned by another crash of thunder. "Anyone there?" When no answer came, he drew his Colt revolver and moved toward the back of the church, where a small cemetery spread out behind a low picket fence. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead as he rounded the corner, and that's when he saw them, 2 young women huddled against the church wall, trying to shelter under the narrow eave. Their dresses were soaked through, and they clung to each other, eyes wide with fear as they spotted him. "Please don't hurt us," the taller one said, stepping slightly in front of the other. Even in the fading light, Issac could see the resemblance between them, sisters without a doubt. Issac holstered his gun immediately. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, raising his hands to show they were empty. "What are you doing out here in this storm?" The younger sister spoke up, her voice trembling. "We had nowhere else to go. They burned our home." "Who did?" Issac asked, but another lightning strike nearby made both women flinch. "We can talk about that later," he decided, taking off his duster and holding it out toward them. "This town isn't safe for you right now, is it?" The older sister shook her head, and Issac saw a bruise forming on her cheekbone. "You're safe under my roof tonight," he promised, his voice gentle but firm. "I have a small place just outside town. You can dry off, get something to eat, and we can figure things out in the morning." The sisters exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. "I'm Issac Xander," he offered, still holding out his coat. "I just moved to these parts." "I'm Catherine Keller," the older sister finally said, accepting the duster. "This is my sister, Charlotte." "We're much obliged, Mr. Xander," Charlotte added, her blonde hair now darkened by the rain. "But you don't know what you're getting into." Issac smiled grimly. "Miss Charlotte, I've been getting into things I shouldn't since before you were born. Now my horse is strong enough to carry both of you. I'll walk alongside." As he helped the Keller sisters onto his horse, Issac couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet new beginning in North Platte had just become considerably more complicated. Yet something in Catherine's determined gaze and the protective way she held her sister made him certain he was doing the right thing. The journey to Issac's modest homestead took nearly an hour through the storm. The small cabin came into view just as the worst of the rain began to subside, a welcome sight with its soft light glowing from within. Issac had left a lamp burning, never imagining he'd be returning with company. "It's not much," he said as he helped Catherine, then Charlotte down from his horse. "But it's dry, and there's a stove for heat." "It looks like heaven to me," Charlotte replied, her teeth chattering slightly. Once inside, Issac quickly stoked the fire in the cast-iron stove while the sisters stood dripping on the rough wooden floor, looking uncertain and out of place. His cabin was simple, one main room with a small table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf filled with worn volumes, and a neatly made bed in the corner. A curtained-off area presumably concealed storage space. "I'll find you some dry clothes," Issac said, disappearing behind the curtain. He emerged with 2 of his shirts and a pair of trousers. "These will be too big, but they're dry. You can change behind that curtain. I'll make some coffee and see what I can find for supper." When the sisters emerged, they looked younger somehow, swimming in his clothes with their hair unpinned and hanging loose to dry. Catherine's auburn waves fell past her shoulders, while Charlotte's blonde curls barely reached her collarbone. They sat at the table while Issac placed steaming mugs of coffee before them, along with a plate of biscuits and some dried beef. "Now," Issac said, sitting across from them, "would you like to tell me what happened?" Catherine wrapped her hands around the warm mug, her green eyes meeting his. "Our father died 3 months ago. He owned a small ranch about 10 miles east of North Platte. The Triple K," Charlotte added. "It wasn't much, but it was ours." Catherine nodded. "After Father died, a man named Victor Rawlins started coming around, saying he wanted to buy our land. When we refused to sell, the accidents started happening." "Accidents?" Issac asked, though he had a good idea what she meant. "Cattle turning up dead, our well water fouled." Catherine's knuckles went white around her mug. "Then last night men came. They wore masks, but I know it was Rawlins' crew. They said we had one last chance to sell. When we refused again, Charlotte's voice broke. "They burned our home. We barely got out with what we're wearing." "We spent the night in the woods," Catherine continued. "We were heading into town to speak with the sheriff when we saw Rawlins and his men on the road. We hid behind the church, afraid they'd seen us." "That's when you found us," Charlotte finished. Issac's jaw tightened. "And your sheriff, would he help?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "Sheriff Donovan. He and Rawlins are thick as thieves. He'd probably arrest us for causing trouble." Issac considered this. North Platte had seemed like the perfect place to disappear, to leave behind his past as a former Union cavalry officer turned reluctant gunslinger. He'd chosen this quiet corner of Nebraska to raise horses in peace. Now, it seemed, trouble had found him anyway. "You have nowhere else to go?" he asked. "No family. Our mother died years ago," Catherine said. "Father had a brother in St. Louis, but we've never met him." Issac ran a hand through his still damp hair. "Well, you're welcome to stay here until we figure something out. I'll take the floor, you two can have the bed." "Mr. Xander, we couldn't possibly," Catherine began. "Please call me Issac. And yes, you can. I've slept on worse than a wooden floor." Charlotte yawned, unable to hide her exhaustion. "Thank you, Issac. Truly." After the sisters had settled into his bed, Issac laid out his bedroll near the stove and stared at the ceiling, listening to the occasional crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the 2 women across the room. He'd come to North Platte seeking solitude, hoping to escape the ghosts that had dogged him since the war. Instead, he'd found 2 sisters in need of protection from a man who sounded like too many others he'd encountered, men who took what they wanted with no regard for those who stood in their way. Issac closed his eyes, knowing sleep would be long in coming. Something about Charlotte Keller's fierce determination and vulnerability stirred feelings he thought he'd buried years ago. Dangerous feelings, especially now. Morning came with clear skies and birdsong. Issac had risen before dawn, careful not to wake the sisters as he slipped outside to tend to his horse and the few cattle he kept. By the time he returned to the cabin, he found Catherine awake and attempting to start breakfast with the meager supplies in his pantry. "You don't need to do that," he said, setting down a pail of fresh milk. "I insist," she replied, not looking up from the biscuit dough she was mixing. "It's the least we can do." Issac watched her work for a moment, struck by how natural she looked in his kitchen, with her hair tied back with a strip of cloth, and the sleeves of his too large shirt rolled up to her elbows. She was older than her sister, perhaps 24 or 25, with a quiet confidence that spoke of years carrying responsibility. "How old are you and Charlotte?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot she'd already prepared. "I'm 26, Catherine answered. "Charlotte's 19. She was just a girl when our mother passed, so I've looked after her since then." "And your father, what kind of man was he?" Catherine's hands stilled for a moment. "He was a good man, stubborn, hardworking. After Mother died, he threw himself into the ranch. He taught us everything, how to ride, rope, even shoot." She smiled faintly. "Said daughters of his weren't going to depend on any man." "He sounds like someone I would have liked," Issac said. "What about you?" Catherine asked, returning to her task. "What brings a man like you to North Platte?" "A man like me," she glanced up, meeting his eyes directly. "I've met men who wear guns before, Mr. Xander. I know the look. You've used yours." Issac didn't deny it. "I was looking for a quiet place to raise horses. I bought this land 3 weeks ago, running from something." "Aren't we all?" he countered. Their conversation was interrupted by Charlotte emerging from behind the curtain, her blonde hair tousled from sleep. "Something smells wonderful," she said, smiling brightly despite the circumstances. After breakfast, Issac outlined his plan. "I need to go into town for supplies and to get a sense of what we're dealing with. You two should stay here out of sight." "I should come with you," Catherine argued. "Rawlins has never seen you. He might talk more freely if he doesn't suspect you're connected to us." Issac frowned. "It's too dangerous." "More dangerous than staying here alone if Rawlins' men come looking," she challenged. "Besides, I need clothes that fit. We both do." He couldn't argue with her logic, though the thought of bringing her into potential danger didn't sit well with him. "Fine, but you'll need to keep your head down. Charlotte stays here where it's safer." Charlotte didn't look happy about the arrangement, but she nodded. "I can keep watch. Father taught me how to use a rifle, remember?" Issac retrieved a Winchester repeater from above the door and handed it to her. "Only if you have no choice," he warned. "Fire once in the air as a warning first. Most men will think twice before approaching an armed homestead." Catherine changed back into her now dry dress, though it still bore smoke stains and a tear along the hem. She pinned her hair up tightly under a faded bonnet Issac found in his trunk, a remnant from the previous owner of the cabin. As they rode toward town, Issac on his gelding and Catherine on a sturdy mare he used for working cattle, he found himself stealing glances at her profile. Despite her ordeal, she sat tall in the saddle, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings with a wariness that spoke of her recent trauma. "This Rawlins," Issac said, breaking the silence. "What more can you tell me about him?" "He came to North Platte about a year ago," Catherine replied. "Bought the largest ranch in the county from old man Peterson when he decided to move to California. Since then, he's been buying up every piece of land he can get his hands on." "And your ranch, what makes it so special?" "Water rights," she said simply. "Our property controls access to Beaver Creek, which runs through the valley. In a dry year, whoever controls that water controls every rancher's fate." Issac nodded thoughtfully. "And this year, driest in a decade, Father refused to sell because he knew what Rawlins would do, charge every rancher a fortune for water access." They reached the outskirts of North Platte, and Issac directed his horse toward the main street. The town was busier than he expected, with wagons and riders moving along the dusty thoroughfare. A train whistled in the distance, reminding Issac that North Platte served as a division point for the Union Pacific Railroad. "Keep your head down," he murmured as they passed a group of cowboys lounging outside a saloon called the Iron Horse. "Where would Rawlins be at this hour?" "If he's not at his ranch, he'll be at the bank," Catherine said. "He's friendly with the banker, Mr. Phillips, and the sheriff's office. She nodded toward a small building with a wooden star hanging outside. There. But like I said, Sheriff Donovan won't help us. Let me worry about that, Issac replied, dismounting and tying his horse to a hitching post outside the general store. He helped Catherine down, noticing how she kept her face turned away from the street. Let's get what we need quickly. You find clothes for you and your sister. I'll gather the other supplies. Inside the store, Issac kept one eye on Catherine as she selected modest dresses and necessities while he filled a list with flour, coffee, beans, and ammunition. The storekeeper, a portly man with spectacles, chatted amicably. New in town, ain't ya? The man asked. Name's Wilbur Green. Don't recall seeing you before. Issac Xander, he replied, shaking the offered hand. Bought the old Miller place a few weeks back. Planning on ranching, horse breeding mostly. I've got good stock from Kentucky. Well, you picked a tough year to start with this drought, Green said, lowering his voice. Between you and me, folks are getting desperate for water access. That Rawlins fella has been buying up water rights left and right. Issac feigned casual interest. Rawlins, don't believe I've met him. Big man both in size and reputation. Owns the Lazy R, biggest spread in the county now. Ambitious type. Green leaned closer. Word is, he's got his eye on political office next. Territorial governor, maybe. Sounds like an important man to know, Issac remarked. Well, speak of the devil, Green muttered, his eyes flicking toward the door. Issac turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man entering the store. His clothes were expensive, his boots polished to a shine, and a heavy gold watch chain stretched across his vest. Two men followed him in, both wearing guns low on their hips. Catherine had her back to the door, but Issac saw her shoulders tense. She'd clearly heard them enter. Mr. Green, Rawlins called, his voice booming in the small space. I'll need supplies for the roundup. Jenkins here will give you the list. Yes, sir, Mr. Rawlins, Green replied, moving quickly to attend to the newcomer. Issac casually positioned himself between Catherine and Rawlins, continuing to examine a display of knives while keeping the rancher in his peripheral vision. Rawlins, however, had already noticed her. Good morning, madam, he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Don't believe I've had the pleasure. Catherine stiffened but didn't turn around. Issac stepped in smoothly. My wife's not feeling well today, sir. We're just getting our supplies and heading back to our place. Rawlins sized Issac up with narrowed eyes. Don't believe we've met. Victor Rawlins, owner of the Lazy R. Issac Xander, he replied, extending his hand. Just moved to the area. Rawlins' handshake was firm, a power play. Where'd you settle, Xander? The old Miller place, about 5 miles northwest of town. Small spread, Rawlins commented. Planning to expand. Just raising horses for now, Issac said easily. No need for more land than I have. One of Rawlins' men whispered something in his ear, and the rancher's eyes narrowed further as he studied Catherine's back. Your wife looks familiar somehow. Have we met, madam? Issac felt Catherine tense beside him and knew they needed to leave. Mr. Green, he called. We'll take these items and whatever my wife has selected. Of course, Mr. Xander, the storekeeper replied, clearly sensing the tension. Rawlins didn't move, still watching Catherine. Strange thing happened last night, he said conversationally. The Keller place caught fire. Terrible accident. My men rode over to help, but the house was already gone. No sign of the Keller sisters anywhere. Issac maintained his neutral expression. That's unfortunate. I hope they're safe. Sheriff's got men looking for them, Rawlins said. For their own protection, of course. Of course, Issac echoed, placing money on the counter. Mr. Green, we'll need these delivered to our place if you don't mind. My wife isn't feeling up to the ride with all these packages. "Happy to help, Mr. Xander," Green said, gathering their purchases. Issac placed his hand lightly on Catherine's back, guiding her toward the door. "Good day, Mr. Rawlins," he said with a nod. They had almost reached the door when one of Rawlins' men stepped into their path. "Boss wants to know where you served," he said to Issac. "During the war." Issac felt rather than saw Catherine's surprise. "6th Michigan Cavalry," he answered truthfully. "Under Custer at Gettysburg. You—" The man grinned, revealing a gold tooth. "4th Texas. We were on the other side." "The war's long over," Issac said calmly, though his right hand hovered near his holster. "Is it?" the man asked. "That's enough, Davis," Rawlins called. "Let Mr. Xander and his wife be on their way." But his eyes held a different message. This wasn't over. Once outside, Issac helped Catherine quickly onto her horse, keeping his body between her and the store window. "Ride normally until we're out of town," he murmured. "Then we'll pick up the pace." They maintained a leisurely trot down the main street, past the saloon where several cowboys watched them with idle curiosity, past the sheriff's office where a deputy lounged in a chair on the porch, and finally past the church, where Issac had found the sisters just the night before. As soon as they cleared the town limits, Issac urged his horse to a canter. "He recognized you," he said grimly. "I think so," Catherine agreed, matching his pace. "His man Davis definitely did. He was one of the riders who came to our ranch." "We need to get back to the cabin and figure out our next move," Issac said. "Rawlins isn't the type to let things go." They rode in tense silence, both scanning the landscape for signs of pursuit. About halfway back to Issac's homestead, Catherine suddenly reined in her horse. "Look," she said, pointing toward a plume of smoke rising in the distance. Issac felt his blood run cold. The smoke was coming from the direction of his cabin. "Charlotte," Catherine whispered, her face draining of color. Without another word, they spurred their horses forward, racing across the open prairie toward the rising smoke. As they crested a small rise, Issac's heart sank. His modest cabin was engulfed in flames, the dry timber burning fiercely in the afternoon sun. "Charlotte!" Catherine screamed, urging her horse faster. Issac caught up to her just as they reached the burning building. "Stay back," he warned, grabbing her reins. "It's too dangerous." "My sister is in there." Catherine tried to dismount, but Issac held her firmly. "Charlotte!" He called out, scanning the area desperately. "Charlotte, can you hear me?" A faint sound came from behind the small barn where Issac kept his horses. He drew his gun and approached cautiously, Catherine right behind him despite his attempts to keep her back. They found Charlotte huddled against the back wall of the barn, the Winchester rifle clutched in her trembling hands, her face streaked with tears and soot. "Charlotte!" Catherine rushed to her sister, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "Thank God you're alive. What happened?" Between sobs, Charlotte explained. "3 men came about an hour after you left. They pretended to be lost, asked for directions. When I wouldn't open the door, they tried to force their way in." Her voice shook. "I fired a warning shot like you said and they backed off. But then they started shooting at the cabin." "How did you get out?" Issac asked, his eyes continuously scanning the horizon for the attackers. "I crawled out the back window when they started setting fire to the front porch," she said. "I think they believed I was still inside." They rode off laughing. Issac's jaw tightened as he watched his new home burn. Everything he owned was in that cabin, meager as it was. But the rising anger he felt wasn't for his possessions, it was for the terror these men had inflicted on a 19-year-old girl left in his care. "Did you recognize any of them?" he asked. Charlotte nodded. "One was that man Davis who works for Rawlins. I recognized him from when they came to our ranch." "We need to move," Issac decided, turning away from the burning cabin. "They might come back to check their handiwork." "Where can we go?" Catherine asked, her arm still around her shaking sister. Issac considered their options. They couldn't go to town. Rawlins clearly had the sheriff in his pocket. They couldn't stay here with the cabin burning. They needed allies, but in a place where Issac had only lived for 3 weeks, allies were in short supply. "There's an abandoned hunting cabin about 10 miles north of here," he finally said. "I found it while exploring my property line. It's small, but it will shelter us for the night while we decide what to do next." They gathered what little they could salvage, the horses from the barn, thankfully unharmed, and the supplies they'd purchased in town, which were still in their saddlebags. As they prepared to leave, Issac noticed Catherine staring at the burning cabin, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "This is our fault. You lost your home because of us." Issac shook his head. "No, this is Rawlins' doing, not yours. A home can be rebuilt. Lives can't be replaced." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of something deeper. But there was no time to dwell on it as the roof of the cabin collapsed in a shower of sparks. "We need to move," Issac said again, helping Charlotte onto his gelding while Catherine mounted the mare. "Stay close and keep your eyes open." The journey to the hunting cabin took longer than Issac had anticipated, as they had to travel carefully to avoid leaving an obvious trail. The sun was setting by the time they reached the small structure nestled among a stand of cottonwoods near a shallow creek. The cabin was rustic, one room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with a single chair, and a narrow cot in the corner. Dust covered every surface, and small animal tracks crisscrossed the dirt floor, but the roof was sound and the walls sturdy. "It's not much," Issac said as he lit a lantern he'd found hanging by the door. "It's shelter," Catherine replied simply, helping Charlotte to the cot. The younger sister was exhausted, the strain of the day evident in her pale face and trembling hands. While Catherine tended to Charlotte, Issac secured the horses in a small lean-to attached to the cabin and gathered firewood. By the time he returned, Charlotte was asleep on the cot, and Catherine sat beside her, gently stroking her hair. Issac built a small fire, careful to keep it minimal so the smoke wouldn't give away their position. As the flames cast flickering shadows across the cabin walls, he and Catherine sat at the table, speaking in low voices to avoid waking Charlotte. "What are we going to do?" Catherine asked, her composed facade finally cracking to reveal the fear beneath. "Rawlins won't stop. He'll keep coming after us until he gets what he wants." Issac considered their options, none of which seemed particularly promising. "We could try to reach the U.S. Marshal in Omaha," he suggested. "Federal authorities might take action, especially if there's corruption in the local law." "That's 100 miles away," Catherine pointed out. "Rawlins would find us before we got halfway there." "You could sell the ranch," Issac said gently. "Take the money and start fresh somewhere else. California maybe, or Oregon," Catherine's eyes flashed. "And let Rawlins win. Let him control every drop of water in the valley and strangle every small rancher who can't pay his prices." She shook her head firmly. "That land has been in our family for 15 years. My father is buried there. I won't give it up without a fight." Issac couldn't help but admire her determination, even as he worried about the danger it placed them all in. "Then we fight," he said simply. "But we need to be smart about it. Rawlins has men, money, and the law on his side." "What do we have?" she asked, the element of surprise for one thing. "He thinks Charlotte died in the fire at your cabin. He probably assumes you're with her. He definitely doesn't know you're with me." Issac leaned forward. "Do you have any proof of your ownership of the ranch? Deeds, papers?" Catherine nodded. "Father kept all the important documents in a strongbox buried under the floorboards in his bedroom. Even if the house burned, those papers should be safe. Good. We'll need those. Issac stood and paced the small cabin. We also need allies. Is there anyone in town who isn't afraid of Rawlins? Anyone who might stand with us? A few of the smaller ranchers, maybe. They've all suffered under Rawlins' water restrictions, Catherine said thoughtfully. And Mr. Green at the general store, he and my father were friends. He might help us quietly. The railroad, too, Issac added. The station master might be willing to send a telegram to the federal marshal for us, bypassing the sheriff entirely. As they talked, Issac noticed Catherine suppressing a yawn. You should get some rest, he said. Take the other side of the cot with your sister. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too, she protested. I'll wake you in a few hours to take your turn, he promised, though he had no intention of doing so. Catherine hesitated, then stood and placed her hand briefly on his arm. Thank you, Issac, for everything. The touch was fleeting, but it sent an unexpected warmth through him. Get some sleep, Catherine, he said softly. Tomorrow will be a long day. As she settled beside her sister on the narrow cot, Issac took up position near the window, his revolver ready on the table beside him. He watched the moonlight filter through the trees outside, thinking about how quickly his life had changed in just 24 hours. He had come to North Platte seeking peace, hoping to leave violence behind. Instead, he had found himself protector to two sisters and enemy to the most powerful man in the county. Yet as his gaze drifted to Catherine's sleeping form, he couldn't bring himself to regret the path he'd chosen. Morning brought a new resolve. While Charlotte prepared a simple breakfast from their limited supplies, Issac and Catherine planned their next move. We need to retrieve those documents from your ranch, Issac said, spreading out a rough map he'd drawn of the area. Then we need to get word to the federal marshal in Omaha. Rawlins will have men watching our property, Catherine warned. Probably, but they'll be watching for you, not me. I can go alone. Catherine immediately shook her head. No, it's my home. I know exactly where the strongbox is buried. I'm coming with you. Issac started to argue, then saw the determination in her eyes and recognized it as matching his own. This woman was not one to sit idly by while others fought her battles. All right, but Charlotte stays here where it's safer. I'm tired of being left behind, Charlotte protested, but her sister was firm. We need someone to watch our backs, Catherine told her. If we don't return by nightfall, take the mare and ride east toward Omaha. Find the federal marshal and tell him everything. The sisters embraced tightly, and Issac turned away, giving them a moment of privacy. When he looked back, Catherine stood ready by the door, her borrowed dress replaced with the new one from their purchases in town, her hair pinned neatly under a bonnet. Ready? He asked. She nodded, her chin held high. Ready. They rode cautiously, keeping to the tree lines and ravines where possible to avoid being spotted. As they approached the burned-out shell of the Keller ranch, Issac signaled for them to dismount and continue on foot, leading their horses through a small copse of trees that provided cover. The sight that greeted them as they reached the edge of the property made Catherine gasp softly. The once proud ranch house was now just a blackened skeleton, with only the stone chimney still standing tall amid the ruins. The barn had been spared, though its doors hung open, the livestock long gone. Two men by the corral, Issac whispered, pointing to where a pair of Rawlins cowboys lounged in the shade, rifles propped beside them. Probably been told to watch for you. The strongbox is under the floorboards in what was my father's bedroom on the east side of the house, Catherine said, her voice tight with emotion as she surveyed the destruction of her home. We'll wait until dark, Issac decided. Less chance of being seen. They retreated to a small hollow about half a mile from the ranch, tethering their horses where they could graze on the sparse grass. As the sun began its slow descent, Catherine and Issac sat side by side, sharing jerky and the last of their water. "Tell me about your ranch," Issac said, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. "What was it like growing up here?" A soft smile played at Catherine's lips. "It was wonderful. Hard work, of course, ranching always is, but beautiful too. In spring, the whole valley would burst into wildflowers. Charlotte and I would collect them for our mother." Her smile faded. "After she died, Father threw himself into expanding the ranch. The Triple K became his whole life." "And yours?" Issac asked. "I suppose it became mine too." "Taking care of Charlotte, helping Father with the books, learning everything I could about ranching." She glanced at him. "What about you? You mentioned the war, but what about after?" Issac's expression grew distant. "After Appomattox, I drifted. Tried my hand at different things, drove cattle up from Texas, worked as a shotgun messenger for Wells Fargo for a time." He hesitated. "Got into some trouble here and there." "What kind of trouble?" she asked. "The kind that follows a man who's good with a gun," he answered simply. "I've been trying to leave that behind. That's why I came here, bought that land. Thought I might finally settle down, raise horses, find some peace." Catherine studied him thoughtfully. "And now you're mixed up in our troubles instead." "I made that choice when I found you behind that church," he said. "And I'd make it again." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Issac felt something shift between them, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He looked away first, uncomfortable with the sudden vulnerability. "It's getting dark," he said, standing and checking his revolver. "We should get ready to move." Under cover of darkness, they approached the burned-out ranch house cautiously. The two watchmen had built a small fire by the corral and appeared to be settling in for the night, passing a bottle between them and laughing loudly. "They're not expecting much trouble," Issac observed quietly as they crept along the perimeter of the property. "Stay close to me." They reached the eastern side of the ruined house, where the bedroom had once stood. Most of the floor had collapsed into the root cellar below, but a section near the chimney remained partially intact, though charred and unstable. "There," Catherine whispered, pointing to a specific area. "Under that large beam." Issac tested the flooring cautiously, feeling it creak beneath his weight. "It's not stable. I'll go. Tell me exactly where to look." "Issac, no, Catherine," he said firmly. "I'm heavier than you, but I have a better chance of moving quickly if that floor gives way. Just tell me where to find it." She hesitated, then nodded. 3 paces from the chimney. There should be a loose floorboard with a small knot in the wood. The box is about a foot down." Issac moved carefully onto the burned flooring, wincing at each creak and groan of the wood. The moonlight provided just enough illumination for him to count his steps from the chimney. Finding the board Catherine had described, he knelt and worked his fingers into the edge, lifting it slowly to reveal a dark cavity beneath. Reaching down, his fingers touched cool metal. He extracted a small iron strongbox, surprisingly heavy for its size. As he straightened, however, a section of the floor gave way beneath his foot with a loud crack. "Issac!" Catherine cried out as he stumbled, nearly falling through into the cellar below. He regained his balance and leapt back to more solid ground, the strongbox clutched tightly against his chest. But the damage was done, the noise had attracted attention. "Hey, who's there?" called one of the watchmen, the beam of a bull's-eye lantern cutting through the darkness toward them. "Run!" Issac whispered urgently, pushing the strongbox into Catherine's hands and drawing his revolver. "Get to the horses. I'll hold them off." "Not without you," she insisted, clutching his arm. The lantern beam drew closer, accompanied by the sound of boots crunching on charred wood. "I see someone over there," one of the men shouted. By the east wall, Issac made a split-second decision. Grabbing Catherine's hand, he pulled her toward a section of collapsed wall, ducking low as a rifle shot cracked through the night air, splintering wood just inches from their heads. They ran in a crouch, using the ruins for cover as more shots rang out behind them. Reaching the tree line, they sprinted for their tethered horses, the shouts of their pursuers growing more distant. "Mount up," Issac ordered, helping Catherine onto her horse before swinging into his own saddle. "Ride hard for the cabin. Don't stop for anything." They galloped away from the Keller ranch, the strongbox secured in Catherine's saddlebag. Behind them, they could hear horses being mounted and the shouts of the men giving chase. Issac led them on a winding path through the darkness, using every trick he knew to confuse their trail. After nearly an hour of hard riding, the sounds of pursuit had faded, but Issac wasn't taking any chances. "We can't go back to the hunting cabin," he said as they paused to rest their winded horses. "It's too risky. They'll be searching everywhere." "Where then?" Catherine asked, clutching the strongbox to her chest. Issac considered their options. "There's a place about 20 miles north of here. An old friend of mine runs a way station for the stage line. Ezra Holloway, he served with me during the war. He'll help us, and he'll have a way to get word to the marshal in Omaha." "But Charlotte, we'll send word where to find us," Issac promised. "But first, we need to get somewhere safe." With reluctance, Catherine agreed, and they set off again, riding through the night toward what Issac hoped would be sanctuary. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, they crested a hill and saw a cluster of buildings in the distance, the way station. "We're almost there," Issac encouraged, noting how Catherine swayed slightly in her saddle from exhaustion. "Just a little further." The way station consisted of a main house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. As they approached, a man emerged from the house, a shotgun cradled in his arms. He was tall and lean, with a thick beard streaked with gray and a patch over his left eye. "That's far enough," the man called out. "State your business." "Ezra, it's Issac Xander," Issac replied, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "We need your help." The man lowered his shotgun slightly, peering at them with his one good eye. "Xander, by God, it is you." He lowered the weapon completely. "Get on in here before someone sees you." Once inside the house, Ezra Holloway proved to be a gracious, if gruff, host. He provided hot coffee and a hearty breakfast while Issac explained their situation. Catherine sat nearby, the strongbox open before her, as she examined the documents inside. "So this Rawlins character is trying to control all the water in the valley," Ezra summarized, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "And he's got the local law in his pocket." "That about sums it up," Issac confirmed. "We need to get word to the federal marshal in Omaha, but first, we need to retrieve Charlotte from the hunting cabin." "I'll send my boy," Ezra offered, referring to his 16-year-old son. "He knows those woods better than anyone. He can bring your sister here safely." Catherine looked up from the papers with visible relief. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Call me Ezra, miss. Any friend of Xander's is a friend of mine." He glanced at the documents spread before her. "Find what you were looking for," Catherine nodded, holding up several papers. "The deed to the ranch, water rights documentation, and letters from the territorial governor confirming our claim." Her face hardened. "Everything we need to prove Rawlins has no legal right to our land or water." "Good," Ezra said, "because you're going to need it. Rawlins isn't known for giving up easily. Word is he's got territorial ambitions, wants to be governor someday. Which explains why he needs to control the water," Issac mused. "Political power in this territory starts with controlling the resources." "Exactly," Ezra confirmed. "Now, I can get a message to the marshal in Omaha with tomorrow's stage, but it'll take at least 3 days for him to respond, even if he comes immediately." "We don't have 3 days," Catherine said worriedly. "Rawlins will tear apart every inch of this county looking for us." Ezra scratched his beard thoughtfully. "There's a circuit judge passing through North Platte the day after tomorrow. Judge Harlan. He's a fair man, not easily bought. If you could present your case to him with those documents as proof." "Rawlins would never let us get near the judge," Issac pointed out. "Not if he knows you're coming," Ezra agreed. "But what if you had help? A diversion, maybe." Before they could discuss this further, the door opened and Ezra's son Thomas entered. "Pa, riders coming. Looks like Rawlins' men. 6 of them about a mile out." Ezra cursed under his breath. "They must have followed your trail." Issac was already on his feet, checking his gun. "Is there another way out of here?" "The root cellar connects to a tunnel that comes out in the barn," Ezra said, moving quickly to a rug on the floor and pulling it aside to reveal a trapdoor. "It was used during the war to hide escaped slaves heading north." "Go," Issac urged Catherine, who was gathering the documents back into the strongbox. "I'll hold them off." "Not alone, you won't," Ezra said, picking up his shotgun. "Thomas, take Miss Keller through the tunnel. Get the horses ready in the barn. If things go south, ride for Judge Harlan's place in Ogallala." Thomas nodded grimly, taking Catherine's arm. "This way, miss." "Issac," Catherine said, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and something deeper. "Be careful." He nodded once, watching as she disappeared down into the cellar with Thomas and the precious strongbox. Then he turned to Ezra, his expression grim. "Let's give them a proper welcome." Ezra grinned fiercely, checking his shotgun. "Just like old times, eh, Captain?" "Let's hope not," Issac replied dryly, remembering the horrors they'd seen during the war. "I'd prefer we all walk away from this one." They positioned themselves strategically, Ezra at an upstairs window with his shotgun, Issac behind a heavy oak table on the ground floor that he'd tipped onto its side for cover. Through the window, he could see the riders approaching at a trot, Davis clearly in the lead. "Let me do the talking," Issac said. "Maybe we can resolve this without bloodshed." Ezra snorted from his position upstairs. "You always were an optimist, Xander." The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Davis dismounted and approached alone, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Xander," he called, "we know you're in there. Send out the Keller woman and maybe we can work something out." Issac moved to the doorway but stayed within the shadow of the house. "There's no need for trouble, Davis. Miss Keller has legal documentation of her ownership. Take that message back to Rawlins." Davis laughed. "Documentation can burn just like houses do. This is your last chance, Xander. Send her out or we're coming in." "I wouldn't advise that," Issac replied calmly. "You're outnumbered and outgunned." This caused Davis to hesitate, his eyes scanning the windows of the house warily. "Outnumbered? There's just you and old One-Eye Holloway. And the 4 men I've got positioned in the barn and behind the house," Issac bluffed. "Former cavalry, all of them. Good shots." Davis's confidence wavered visibly as he glanced back at his men who were also looking increasingly uncertain. "You're lying." "Care to find out?" Issac challenged. "Or would you rather take a message back to Rawlins? Tell him Miss Keller is prepared to present her case to Judge Harlan when he arrives in North Platte. Tell him if anything happens to her or her sister before then, copies of all her documentation plus affidavits detailing his threats and the burning of both ranches will be on their way to the territorial governor and the federal marshal." Davis spat on the ground. "Rawlins won't stand for this." "Then he can face me man to man," Issac replied. "Or he can face the law. His choice." For a tense moment, it seemed Davis might order an attack anyway, but after a long look at the various windows and positions where Issac's fictional reinforcements might be hiding, he backed down. "This isn't over, Xander," he warned, mounting his horse. "Not by a long shot." "I never thought it was," Issac replied evenly. They watched as Davis and his men rode away, waiting until they were well out of sight before relaxing their guard. Ezra came downstairs, slapping Issac on the back. "Not bad for an old cavalry officer. That bluff about extra men was inspired." "It won't fool them for long," Issac said grimly. "Once they report back to Rawlins, he'll figure out it was just the two of us." "By then, you'll be long gone," Ezra said. "I'll have Thomas take you and the Keller sisters to my brother's place near Ogallala tonight. You can lay low there until the judge arrives in North Platte." Issac shook his head. "No, that's the play Rawlins will expect. He'll have men watching all the roads to Ogallala." He paced thoughtfully. "We need to do something unexpected." Before he could elaborate, the trapdoor opened and Catherine emerged from the cellar, followed by Thomas. "Is it safe?" she asked anxiously. "For now," Issac confirmed. "They've gone, but they'll be back with reinforcements once Rawlins realizes we bluffed them." Catherine's eyes widened. "Charlotte, Thomas will still go get her," Ezra assured her, "but we need to move you somewhere safer in the meantime." "I've been thinking," Issac said slowly. "Rawlins is expecting us to run to hide. What if we did the opposite? What if we went into North Platte openly?" "That's suicide," Ezra protested. "Not if we have witnesses, lots of them," Issac countered. "The day after tomorrow is Sunday. The whole town will be at church. If we arrive during services, present our case to the entire congregation with the documents as proof." "Rawlins wouldn't dare move against us with so many witnesses," Catherine finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Exactly. And if Judge Harlan is arriving that day as scheduled, he'll likely attend services as well. We can present our case directly to him, in front of the entire town." Ezra whistled low. "It's risky, Xander. Rawlins might decide it's worth the risk to stop you, witnesses or no witnesses." "That's why we need to spread the word," Issac said. "Get as many people as possible to that church, especially the small ranchers who have suffered under Rawlins' water restrictions. They'll stand with us if they know the truth." "I can help with that," Thomas volunteered. "After I bring Charlotte here, I can ride to the outlying ranches. Most of those folks have no love for Rawlins." Catherine stepped forward, her face set with determination. "It's a good plan. Risky, yes, but better than running forever. This is our home. We need to fight for it." Ezra looked between them, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but you'll need more than just documents and the truth on your side. You'll need protection." He disappeared into another room, returning with a Winchester rifle which he handed to Issac. "Take this. And I'll round up a few more trustworthy men to stand with you." As preparations were made, Issac found himself alone with Catherine for a moment near the window. She stood gazing out at the distant horizon, her profile illuminated by the morning sun, her expression thoughtful. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly, joining her. She shook her head. "No, just thinking about my father. He always taught us to stand our ground, to fight for what's ours." She turned to face him, a small smile touching her lips. "He would have liked you, Issac." "I hope so," he replied. He raised two remarkable daughters. Their eyes held for a long moment, the connection between them deepening with each passing second. Without conscious thought, Issac reached out, gently touching her cheek. Catherine leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "When this is over," he said softly, "if we succeed." "When we succeed," she corrected firmly, her eyes opening to meet his. He smiled. "When we succeed, what then? Will you rebuild the ranch?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "It's our home, but—" She hesitated, then continued, It's a big ranch for two women to manage alone. The implication hung in the air between them, an unspoken question. Before Issac could respond, the moment was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They both tensed, moving away from the window as Ezra appeared with his shotgun. "It's Thomas," Ezra announced with relief after peering outside, "and he's got company." They rushed to the door as Thomas rode up, Charlotte seated behind him on his horse. The youngest Keller sister looked exhausted but unharmed, and she nearly fell into Catherine's arms as she dismounted. "Thank God you're safe," Catherine murmured, holding her sister tightly. "I was so worried." "I'm fine," Charlotte assured her, though her voice trembled slightly. "I hid when I saw riders coming near the cabin. Thomas found me in the woods." She glanced at Issac, a small smile forming. "I knew you two would come back for me somehow." Over the next day, they prepared meticulously for their confrontation with Rawlins. Ezra's son Thomas returned from his rounds of the neighboring ranches. With encouraging news, at least a dozen small ranchers had pledged to support them at the church service, angered by Rawlins' stranglehold on the water rights. "Most of them have been suffering silently," Thomas reported. "They're afraid of Rawlins, but they're more afraid of losing everything in this drought. When I told them about the Keller documents proving their right to access Beaver Creek, they were ready to fight." Meanwhile, Catherine and Charlotte carefully organized their documentation, preparing to present their case clearly and effectively. Issac was impressed by Catherine's methodical approach. She might lack formal legal training, but she had a sharp mind and a thorough understanding of the land and water rights involved. "My father made sure we understood every aspect of the ranch business," she explained when Issac commented on her knowledge. "He said women are often cheated because men don't expect them to understand contracts and legal matters." The night before their planned confrontation, after a simple dinner provided by Ezra's housekeeper, the household retired early, all except Issac, who found sleep elusive. He sat on the porch, Winchester across his knees, watching the road and the surrounding landscape for any sign of trouble. He was surprised when the door opened softly and Catherine joined him, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill. "You should be resting," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be challenging." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, settling beside him on the porch steps. "Too many thoughts." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through the prairie grass. "Are you afraid?" Issac finally asked. Catherine considered the question. "Yes," she answered honestly, "but not of Rawlins. I'm afraid of failing my father, of losing the land he worked so hard to build. I'm afraid for Charlotte's future." "And your own," she smiled faintly. "My future has always been tied to the ranch. I never really considered anything else. Never thought about a husband, children of your own." "Once, perhaps," she said softly. "There was a young man, son of a neighboring rancher. We were sweet on each other for a time. What happened? He wanted me to sell my share of the ranch after father died, move east with him to St. Louis." Her voice hardened slightly. "He didn't understand that the ranch wasn't just land to me, it was my heritage, my responsibility. We parted ways." Issac nodded, understanding completely. "Some people don't understand what it means to be tied to the land, to have a purpose beyond yourself." "You understand," she observed, studying his profile in the moonlight. "I've spent too many years without roots, without purpose," he admitted. "When I bought that land outside North Platte, it was the first time I'd felt connected to something in a long time." "And now it's gone," Catherine said regretfully, "because of us." Issac shook his head. "A cabin can be rebuilt. Land endures." He turned to face her fully. "Catherine, when this is over, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that meeting you and Charlotte, helping you, it's given me something I thought I'd lost." "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hope," he answered simply. "A reason to stop running from my past, a future worth fighting for." In the silver moonlight, Catherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss. Issac's hand came up to cup her cheek, deepening the kiss for a moment before they both pulled away, conscious of where they were. "We should get some rest," Catherine murmured, though she made no move to leave. "We should," Issac agreed, equally reluctant to break the moment. Finally, Catherine stood, her hand lingering on his shoulder. "Good night, Issac, and thank you for everything." As he watched her disappear back into the house, Issac felt a certainty settle over him. Whatever happened tomorrow, his life had changed irrevocably the moment he found those sisters hiding behind the church, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, a beautiful day that belied the tension running through the small group gathered at Ezra's way station. They'd risen before dawn, making final preparations for their journey to North Platte and the confrontation that awaited them. Charlotte had sewn a special pocket into the lining of Catherine's dress to conceal the most important documents, while copies were distributed among Ezra and Thomas as a precaution. Issac checked and rechecked his weapons, hoping he wouldn't need them but unwilling to enter Rawlins' territory unprepared. "The church service starts at 10, Ezra reminded them as they prepared to depart. "Judge Harlan always attends services in whatever town he's visiting. He's a religious man." "Then we should arrive around 10:30, Issac decided. "By then, the service will be well underway, and our entrance will be noticed by everyone." They set out with the rising sun at their backs, riding at a measured pace to conserve their horses' strength. Ezra and Thomas accompanied them. Along with 2 other men, Ezra had recruited former soldiers who had served with him during the war, and now ran a freight business between North Platte and Ogallala. As they rode, Issac found himself continuously scanning their surroundings, expecting an ambush at any moment. But their journey remained surprisingly peaceful, with no sign of Rawlins or his men. "It's too quiet," Ezra muttered as they paused to water the horses at a small creek about 5 miles from North Platte. "Rawlins must know we're coming. He's waiting for us in town," Issac agreed grimly. "Probably has men positioned around the church." "Then we adjust our plan," Catherine said firmly. "Instead of arriving during the service, we arrive just as it's ending, when everyone is outside in the open where Rawlins can't control the situation." Issac nodded approvingly. "Good thinking." "And we approach from different directions, make it harder for them to stop all of us." They rode more slowly after that, timing their arrival carefully. When the church steeple came into view on the outskirts of North Platte, they could see a large number of horses and wagons gathered around it, a good sign that attendance was high today. "Look," Charlotte said suddenly, pointing toward a group of riders approaching from the west. The ranchers Thomas spoke to they came. Indeed, at least 15 men on horseback were converging on the church from various directions, their expressions grim and determined. Many had brought their families as well, women and children in wagons following behind. "Word has spread," Ezra said with satisfaction. "Rawlins won't be able to intimidate everyone." As they drew closer, they could hear the congregation singing a final hymn, signaling that the service was nearly over. Issac turned to Catherine, who sat tall and proud on her horse despite the danger ahead. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, her eyes clear and focused. "Ready." They waited at a respectful distance as the church doors opened and the congregation began to file out into the sunshine. Issac recognized many faces from his brief time in North Platte: the storekeeper Green, the blacksmith and his family, the station master from the railroad. And there, emerging with an air of importance, was a distinguished-looking gentleman in a black suit whom Issac assumed must be Judge Harlan. Moving slightly apart from the crowd, standing with several of his men, was Victor Rawlins himself. His face darkened with anger as he spotted the approaching riders, and Issac saw him whisper urgently to Sheriff Donovan, who stood beside him. "Now," Issac said quietly, and their group moved forward in unison, approaching the churchyard from 3 different directions. The conversation among the churchgoers died away as people noticed the newcomers. Whispers spread rapidly through the crowd as Catherine and Charlotte Keller were recognized, despite reports of their supposed deaths in the fire. Issac guided his horse directly to the center of the churchyard, Catherine and Charlotte flanking him. Ezra and the others positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter, weapons visible but not drawn. "Good morning, neighbors," Issac called out, his voice carrying easily in the sudden hush. "I apologize for interrupting your Sunday, but a grave injustice has been committed in your community, and we've come seeking rightful redress." Sheriff Donovan stepped forward, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Now see here, Xander. These women are wanted for questioning about the fire at their property." "That's interesting, Sheriff," Catherine replied clearly, "considering we were the victims of that fire, not its cause." Judge Harlan, a tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, moved to the front of the crowd. "What's the meaning of this interruption, Sheriff? Who are these people?" Before Donovan could answer, Catherine spoke up. "Your Honor, I am Catherine Keller, and this is my sister Charlotte. Our father was James Keller, who established the Triple K Ranch 15 years ago. 3 nights ago, men working for Victor Rawlins burned our home to the ground because we refused to sell our water rights." Murmurs spread through the crowd as Rawlins pushed forward, his face flushed with anger. "That's a lie. The Keller place caught fire accidentally. My men tried to help." "Is that why they shot at us when we returned to salvage what we could?" Issac challenged. "Is that why they burned my cabin as well, nearly killing Charlotte, who was inside?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and several of the ranchers who had arrived with them moved closer, lending their silent support. Judge Harlan raised his hands for silence. "These are serious allegations, Miss Keller. Do you have any proof of what you claim?" Catherine dismounted gracefully, reaching into the hidden pocket of her dress to withdraw the documents. "I have the original deed to our property, signed by the territorial governor, explicitly granting water rights for Beaver Creek to our family and ensuring access for neighboring ranchers." She handed the papers to the judge. "I also have sworn statements from neighbors who witnessed Mr. Rawlins' men threatening us repeatedly in the weeks before the fire." Rawlins' face had gone from red to white with fury. "This is absurd. These documents could be forgeries." "The territorial governor's seal is not easily forged, Mr. Rawlins," Judge Harlan observed dryly as he examined the papers. "Nor is the signature of my predecessor, Judge Williams, who witnessed this deed." More ranchers were stepping forward now, emboldened by Catherine's stand. "Rawlins has been charging us triple the fair price for water access," one man called out. "My cattle are dying because I can't afford his rates. He threatened to run me off my land when I complained," added another. The tide of public opinion was visibly turning, and Sheriff Donovan looked increasingly uncomfortable. Issac kept his eyes on Rawlins, watching for any sign that the man might resort to violence. He wasn't disappointed. With a subtle nod from Rawlins, Davis and another man began moving toward Catherine, their intentions clear. Issac stepped between them, his hand on his holstered pistol. That's far enough. You're outnumbered, Xander, Davis snarled, though he stopped his advance. Am I? Issac replied calmly, gesturing to the ranchers who had now formed a protective circle around them, many with rifles or shotguns in hand. These men have families who are suffering because of Rawlins' greed. How many of your hired guns will die before you back down? And for what? So your boss can control a creek. Judge Harlan's authoritative voice cut through the tension. There will be no violence at this church. Sheriff Donovan, I suggest you do your job and maintain order. Donovan looked torn, his loyalty to Rawlins warring with the very public scrutiny now focused on him. Finally, he nodded. Everyone just stay calm. No need for trouble on the Lord's day. Judge Harlan turned to Catherine, his expression grave but fair. Miss Keller, based on these documents, your claim appears legitimate. I'll convene a formal hearing tomorrow morning at the courthouse to review all evidence from both parties. He looked sternly at Rawlins. Until then, Mr. Rawlins, you will cease any actions against the Keller property or water rights. Is that clear? Rawlins was barely containing his rage, but even he recognized when he was outmaneuvered. Perfectly clear, Your Honor, he said through clenched teeth, before turning a venomous glare on Issac and Catherine. This isn't over, he added in a lower voice. For today it is, Issac replied evenly, never breaking eye contact with the man. As Rawlins and his men retreated, the crowd began to disperse, many stopping to speak with Catherine and Charlotte, offering support or simply expressing relief that someone had finally stood up to the powerful rancher. The minister invited them all back into the church to discuss matters further, away from the hot sun. Inside, Catherine found herself surrounded by well-wishers and supporters, many of whom had kept their distance previously out of fear of Rawlins. Issac watched with pride as she handled each conversation with grace and intelligence, never showing the exhaustion he knew she must be feeling. You've done something remarkable today, Judge Harlan said, appearing at Issac's side. Standing against a man like Rawlins takes courage. The courage was Catherine's, Issac replied honestly. I just helped her find a way to use it effectively. The judge studied him thoughtfully. I know your reputation, Xander. Word travels even to the bench. They say you were one of the fastest guns west of the Mississippi before you disappeared a year ago. Issac stiffened slightly. That life is behind me, Your Honor. I'm glad to hear it, Harlan said sincerely. This territory needs men who stand for justice, not just men who are quick on the draw. He glanced toward Catherine, who was now speaking with Charlotte and several of the ranchers' wives. She's quite a woman. Yes, Issac agreed softly. She is. I'll do my best to ensure justice is served in my courtroom tomorrow, Harlan promised. But be careful. Men like Rawlins rarely accept defeat gracefully. With that warning, the judge moved away to speak with others, leaving Issac to ponder his words. Despite their public victory today, he knew the danger wasn't past. Rawlins had too much at stake to simply surrender. That evening, Catherine, Charlotte, and Issac accepted the minister's offer to stay in rooms attached to the church. Many of the ranchers volunteered to keep watch throughout the night, taking shifts to ensure Rawlins' men didn't try anything before the hearing. After a simple meal provided by the minister's wife, Issac found Catherine sitting alone in the small church garden, gazing up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. You should try to rest, he said, sitting beside her on the wooden bench. Tomorrow will be another long day. I know, she replied, her voice tired but content. I just needed a moment to take it all in. Yesterday I thought we'd lost everything. Tonight we have hope. More than hope, Issac corrected gently. You have justice on your side, and now you have allies willing to stand with you. Catherine turned to him, her expression earnest in the fading light. "We couldn't have done this without you, Issac. When you found us behind this very church, we were desperate with nowhere to turn." She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "You said we'd be safe under your roof, but you've given us so much more than safety." Issac squeezed her hand. "I told you before meeting you and Charlotte gave me something I'd been missing for a long time, a purpose, a reason to stop drifting. And after tomorrow," she asked softly, "when this is resolved, will you keep drifting?" He looked into her eyes, seeing the question she wasn't quite asking. "No," he answered firmly. "My drifting days are done. I found where I belong when I found you, Catherine." Her smile was like the sunrise, full of promise and hope. Slowly, they leaned toward each other, their lips meeting in a kiss that held all the tenderness and passion of their growing feelings. Unlike their first kiss on Ezra's porch, this one deepened, Catherine's arms sliding around Issac's neck as he pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Issac rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he whispered, "I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." "Nothing would make me happier," Catherine replied, her voice thick with emotion. "The Triple K has always been a family ranch. It needs a family to run it." The sound of footsteps on the gravel path made them move apart slightly as Charlotte approached, a knowing smile on her face. "The minister says we should all come inside now. It's getting dark." Issac stood, offering his hand to Catherine. "Your sister's right. We should get some rest before tomorrow." As they walked back to the church together, Issac felt a peace settle over him that had eluded him for years. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together. And for the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to the future. The courthouse in North Platte was packed to capacity the following morning. It seemed every resident of the county had turned out to witness the confrontation between Victor Rawlins and the Keller sisters. Judge Harlan presided from a simple raised desk at the front of the room, his expression stern and impartial. Rawlins had arrived with his lawyer, a slick-looking man named Preston, who had been brought in from Omaha specifically for this hearing. They sat at one table, while Catherine, Charlotte, and Issac occupied the other. Ezra and several of the supportive ranchers filled the first row of seats behind them. "This is an informal hearing to determine the validity of competing claims to water rights for Beaver Creek," Judge Harlan began. "I'll hear evidence from both parties and render a decision based on territorial law and precedent." He nodded to Catherine. "Miss Keller, as the original claimant, you may present your case first." Catherine rose gracefully, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the expensive suit worn by Rawlins' lawyer. Yet she carried herself with such dignity and confidence that every eye in the courtroom was fixed on her as she approached the judge's desk with her documents. "Your Honor, my father James Keller established our ranch in 1863, receiving a land grant from the territorial governor that explicitly included water rights to Beaver Creek." She presented the deed and accompanying documents. "As you can see, the grant specifies that while we control the primary water rights, we are obligated to ensure fair access for neighboring properties at reasonable rates." She went on to explain how her father had always honored this obligation, charging only minimal fees to cover the maintenance of irrigation channels and dams. After his death 3 months ago, Mr. Rawlins began pressuring us to sell our property, using increasingly threatening tactics. "Objection, Your Honor," Preston interrupted smoothly. "Miss Keller is making unsupported allegations against my client. I have sworn statements from 5 neighboring ranchers documenting these threats," Catherine countered, producing the affidavits. "And I have witnesses present who can testify to Mr. Rawlins' men burning both our home and Mr. Xander's cabin." Judge Harlan examined the statements carefully. "I'll allow the testimony and affidavits. Please continue, Miss Keller." For nearly an hour, Catherine presented her case methodically, laying out not only the legal basis for her claim, but the moral implications of allowing one man to control a resource essential to every rancher in the valley. She called several witnesses, including Ezra Holloway, who testified about the attack on his way station by Rawlins' men. When it was Rawlins' turn, his lawyer presented a different narrative, one where the Keller sisters were incompetent to manage their inheritance, and where Rawlins was simply trying to bring modern, efficient management to the valley's water resources. "My client offered fair market value for the Keller property," Preston argued smoothly. "The unfortunate fire was indeed a tragedy, but Mr. Rawlins had nothing to do with it. In fact, he sent men to help as soon as he heard about the blaze." Rawlins himself took the stand, projecting an image of reasonable concern. "I only want what's best for this valley," he claimed. "Centralized control of water rights would ensure fair distribution during droughts like this one." "At triple the normal rates," Issac interjected from his seat. Judge Harlan gavelled for order. "Mr. Xander, you'll have your chance to speak. Please respect the proceedings." When Issac was finally called to testify, he spoke plainly about finding the sisters behind the church, about the burning of his cabin with Charlotte inside, and about the confrontation at Ezra's way station. "Your Honor," he concluded, "this isn't just about legal documents. It's about a man using force and intimidation to take what isn't his. If Victor Rawlins gains control of all the water in this valley, every small rancher will be at his mercy. Some will lose everything." The courtroom was silent as Judge Harlan considered all the testimony and evidence presented. Finally, he cleared his throat and delivered his ruling. "Based on the documentation and testimony presented today, I find that the water rights to Beaver Creek are legally and rightfully the property of Catherine and Charlotte Keller, as specified in the original land grant to their father." He fixed Rawlins with a stern gaze. "Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by the allegations of intimidation and violence. Sheriff Donovan, I am ordering an investigation into the fires at both the Keller and Xander properties." Sheriff Donovan, who had been conspicuously quiet throughout the proceedings, shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, Your Honor." "Additionally," Harlan continued, "I am issuing an injunction preventing Victor Rawlins or any of his employees from interfering with the Keller property or water rights in any way." He turned to Catherine. "Miss Keller, the court recognizes your right to rebuild your home and continue managing the water rights as your father did, with fair access for all neighboring properties." A cheer erupted from the ranchers in attendance, while Rawlins' face darkened with barely contained fury. Judge Harlan gavelled for order once more. "This hearing is concluded. My written decision will be filed with the Territorial Land Office by the end of the week." He stood, signaling that the proceedings were over. As people began to file out of the courtroom, Issac kept a watchful eye on Rawlins, who was engaged in a heated, whispered conversation with his lawyer. Catherine and Charlotte were surrounded by well-wishers, accepting congratulations and offers of help to rebuild their home. "You haven't won," Rawlins said coldly as he passed by Issac on his way out. "This is my territory. No judge's ruling will change that." "The law says differently," Issac replied evenly. "Be smart, Rawlins. Accept the decision and move on." Rawlins' eyes narrowed. "You're a dead man, Xander. You and those Keller women both." Before Issac could respond, Sheriff Donovan appeared at Rawlins' elbow. "Mr. Rawlins, I need to speak with you about the judge's order for an investigation." With a final glare at Issac, Rawlins allowed himself to be led away by the sheriff. Issac watched them go, a sense of unease settling over him despite their victory in court. Men like Rawlins didn't surrender power easily, and a legal defeat might only drive him to more desperate measures. Catherine appeared at his side, her face glowing with the triumph of vindication. "We did it," she said, squeezing his hand. "Father would be so proud." Issac smiled, pushing aside his concerns for the moment. "He would be proud of you, Catherine. You were magnificent in there." "What happens now?" Charlotte asked, joining them with Ezra and Thomas. "Now we rebuild," Catherine said firmly, "both our home and Issac's. And I think we should stick together until we're sure Rawlins has accepted the judge's decision," Issac added. "He didn't seem pleased when he left." Ezra nodded in agreement. "You're all welcome to stay at the way station for as long as needed. Safety in numbers." As they left the courthouse, several ranchers approached, offering lumber, tools, and labor to help rebuild the Keller home. "We owe you our livelihoods," one grizzled old rancher told Catherine. "Least we can do is help you get back on your feet." The outpouring of support was overwhelming, and Issac saw tears in Catherine's eyes as she thanked them all. This community, which had seemed so hostile just days ago under Rawlins' influence, was revealing its true heart. They spent the afternoon at the general store, purchasing supplies for the rebuilding efforts that would begin the following day. Mr. Green insisted on extending credit to the sisters, refusing to take Issac's money. "You three did what none of the rest of us had the courage to do," he said quietly. Standing up to Rawlins was long overdue. As evening approached, they prepared to ride back to Ezra's way station for the night. The streets of North Platte were quieter now, most residents having returned to their homes or businesses. Issac helped load their supplies into a wagon borrowed from one of the supportive ranchers. "I'll feel better once we're away from town," he admitted to Catherine as they finished securing the last of the provisions. "Rawlins isn't the type to give up easily." "I know," she replied, glancing around uneasily. "I can almost feel him watching us." As if her words had conjured him, Davis suddenly appeared from an alleyway between buildings, blocking their path to where Ezra waited with the horses. Two more of Rawlins' men emerged behind him. "Going somewhere?" Davis asked, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. Issac stepped in front of Catherine and Charlotte. "We're leaving town peacefully, Davis. I suggest you let us pass." Davis spat on the ground. "Rawlins wants a word with the ladies, private-like." "That's not happening," Issac said firmly, his own hand moving toward his weapon. "The judge made his ruling. It's over." "See, that's where you're wrong," Davis drawled. "It ain't over till Mr. Rawlins says it's over." He looked past Issac to Catherine. "Come along quiet, miss, and nobody gets hurt, otherwise." He let the threat hang in the air. Issac was calculating their odds, 3 gunmen against himself and Ezra, with Catherine, Charlotte, and Thomas caught in the middle. Not good. But before he could decide on a course of action, a new voice joined the confrontation. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Sheriff Donovan asked, approaching with 2 deputies. His hand rested casually on his holstered pistol, but his eyes were hard as he surveyed the scene. Davis hesitated, clearly not expecting the sheriff's intervention. "No problem, Sheriff. Just having a friendly conversation." "Didn't look friendly to me," Donovan remarked. "And I couldn't help but notice you boys seemed to be ignoring Judge Harlan's injunction against interfering with the Keller sisters." Issac was as surprised as Davis by the sheriff's apparent change of heart. Donovan had been firmly in Rawlins' pocket until now. Davis sensed the shift as well. "Since when do you care about the judge's orders? Rawlins says." "I don't work for Rawlins," Donovan interrupted sharply. "I'm the law in North Platte, and I've been reminded today what that actually means." He stepped closer to Davis. "Now, I suggest you and your friends move along before I decide to arrest you for attempted intimidation." For a tense moment, it seemed Davis might challenge the sheriff, but after a quick assessment of the armed deputies flanking Donovan, he backed down. "This ain't over," he muttered, backing away with his companions. "Thank you, Sheriff," Catherine said once Rawlins' men had retreated. "I wasn't sure you'd uphold the judge's ruling." Donovan had the grace to look somewhat ashamed. "Judge Harlan reminded me of a few things today, Miss Keller. About duty and honor," he glanced at Issac, "and about choosing the right side." "Does this mean you'll actually investigate the fires?" Issac asked, still wary of the sheriff's sudden conversion. "Already started," Donovan confirmed. "Found a witness who saw Rawlins' men at your cabin the day it burned, Xander. Judge Harlan's issued warrants for Davis and 2 others." "What about Rawlins himself?" Catherine pressed. Donovan sighed. "Still gathering evidence there. He's careful about keeping his own hands clean." He tipped his hat. "I'll have deputies escort you all to the edge of town. Be careful out there. Rawlins isn't taking this defeat well." As they rode out of North Platte with their police escort, Issac found himself reassessing the situation. They had won a significant victory in court, and now it seemed even the sheriff was breaking free of Rawlins' influence. But the threat remained, perhaps more dangerous than ever with Rawlins backed into a corner. "What are you thinking?" Catherine asked, guiding her horse alongside his. "That we need to be prepared for anything," Issac replied honestly. "Rawlins has too much at stake to simply give up." "We'll be vigilant," she agreed. "But we also need to start rebuilding. We can't put our lives on hold forever because of his threats." Issac smiled at her determination. "No, we can't. And we won't." The next week passed in a flurry of activity as work began on rebuilding the Keller ranch house. True to their word, many of the neighboring ranchers arrived with lumber, tools, and willing hands. The foundation was marked out on the first day, slightly larger than the original house had been. "We're adding a room," Catherine explained to Issac with a meaningful look that made his heart skip a beat. "For the future." Issac split his time between overseeing the construction and keeping watch for any sign of trouble from Rawlins or his men. Sheriff Donovan had arrested Davis and 2 others for the cabin fire, but Rawlins himself remained free, though conspicuously absent from town. "Where do you think he's gone?" Charlotte asked one evening as they sat around a campfire near the partially constructed house. They had been staying in tents on the property during the rebuilding, unwilling to leave their land unprotected even at night. "Probably Omaha," Ezra suggested. He had stayed to help with the rebuilding, his son Thomas proving invaluable with his carpentry skills. "Trying to pull strings with his political connections, I'd wager. Or hiring more gunmen," Issac added grimly. "We shouldn't let our guard down." Despite the lingering threat, life began to take on a rhythm of normalcy. Catherine worked tirelessly alongside the men during the day, demonstrating a knowledge of construction that surprised many but not Issac, who had come to appreciate her competence in all things. Charlotte took charge of cooking for the workers, her natural cheerfulness lifting spirits at the end of long, exhausting days. And throughout it all, Issac found himself falling deeper in love with Catherine. Their moments alone were rare and precious, a shared glance across the construction site, a brief touch of hands while passing tools, occasional quiet conversations by the campfire after others had retired for the night. "I've been thinking," Issac said during one such evening as they sat side by side watching the embers glow, "about my land." "Do you still want to rebuild there?" Catherine asked. "The offer to stay here is still open." Her voice held a hint of vulnerability that touched him deeply. He took her hand, entwining their fingers. "Actually, I was thinking of selling it." She looked up in surprise. "Selling? But your horses, your plans can be relocated, he finished. This ranch has better grazing land anyway, room to expand the horse breeding operation alongside your cattle. He paused, gathering his courage. That is, if you're still interested in a partner. Catherine's smile was radiant in the firelight. A partner in the ranch or in life? Both, Issac replied softly. If you'll have me. In answer, she leaned in and kissed him, her lips warm and certain against his. When they parted, she whispered, "Nothing would make me happier, Issac Xander." Their moment was interrupted by the sound of a rider approaching fast. Issac was on his feet instantly, gun drawn, positioning himself between Catherine and the potential threat. But it was Thomas Holloway who rode into the circle of firelight, his young face tense with urgency. "Rawlins is back," he announced breathlessly. "And he's brought at least a dozen men with him. They're camped about 5 miles east of town." "Did your father send you?" Issac asked, helping the young man dismount. Thomas nodded. "Pa says they're not even trying to hide. It's like they want everyone to know they're coming." "A show of force," Issac muttered, "trying to intimidate us and anyone who might stand with us." "What do we do?" Charlotte asked, having emerged from her tent at the commotion. "We can't fight that many men." Issac considered their options. The house was only half built, offering little protection. They had perhaps 20 supporters among the neighboring ranchers, but many had families to protect and might hesitate to engage in open conflict. "We need to get word to Sheriff Donovan," he decided. "And to Judge Harlan if he's still in the area. This is exactly the kind of reckless action that could get Rawlins arrested if the law sees it." "I'll go," Thomas volunteered. "I can ride back to town tonight." "No," Catherine interrupted. "It's too dangerous for anyone to travel alone." She turned to Issac. "We should all go to town together first thing in the morning, safety in numbers." Issac nodded slowly. "You're right, but we post double watches tonight. No one sleeps alone." The night passed tensely but without incident. At first light, they packed what valuables they could carry and prepared to ride as a group to North Platte. 8 of the neighboring ranchers who had been helping with construction joined them, creating a formidable party of 14 riders. As they approached town, Issac felt a growing unease. The streets were unusually quiet for mid-morning, with few people visible. Those who were out moved quickly, heads down, as if eager to avoid notice. They rode directly to the sheriff's office, where they found Donovan and his deputies loading rifles and checking ammunition. The sheriff looked up as they entered, his expression grim. "I was wondering when you folks would show up," he said, nodding to Issac and Catherine. "Rawlins and his men rode into town about an hour ago. They're at the Iron Horse Saloon." "What are they planning?" Catherine asked. Donovan shook his head. "Nothing good. Rawlins is drunk and making threats saying he's going to reclaim what's his and teach a lesson to those who crossed him. He's got at least a dozen hired guns with him." "And you're just letting them sit there making threats?" one of the ranchers demanded. "I've sent for help," Donovan replied defensively. "Telegraphed the federal marshal in Omaha, but until they arrive I'm trying to avoid a bloodbath in my town." He looked at Issac. "I've got 5 deputies. Rawlins has 3 times that many guns." Issac understood the sheriff's dilemma. "How long until the marshals arrive?" "Tomorrow at the earliest," Donovan admitted. "I've advised everyone to stay off the streets until then." Catherine stepped forward, her expression determined. "We can't hide for a day while Rawlins terrorizes the town. This is exactly what he wants to show everyone he's still in control, law or no law." "What do you suggest, Miss Keller?" Donovan asked, a hint of respect in his voice. "I can't arrest him for sitting in a saloon, and I don't have the manpower to take on his hired guns if they resist." "But we do," Issac realized. looking around at the ranchers who had accompanied them. "Between your deputies, these men, and others in town who have supported us, we could easily match Rawlins' numbers." "You're talking about a civilian posse," Donovan said dubiously. "I'm talking about the community standing together," Issac corrected. "Not to start a fight, but to show Rawlins that intimidation won't work anymore." Catherine nodded enthusiastically. "If Rawlins sees that the entire town is united against him, he might back down without violence." "And if he doesn't," Donovan pressed, "then we're no worse off than waiting for him to make the first move," Issac replied. "At least this way we choose the time and place." After a moment's consideration, Donovan nodded. "All right, I'll deputize anyone willing to stand with us. But our goal is to arrest Rawlins and his men peacefully if possible." Word spread quickly through North Platte. Within 2 hours, the sheriff's office was surrounded by nearly 30 determined ranchers, shopkeepers, railroad workers, all armed and ready to defend their town against Rawlins' tyranny. Judge Harlan himself arrived, having delayed his departure upon hearing of Rawlins' return. "This is more than a water rights dispute now," the judge told Issac as they prepared to confront Rawlins. "This is about the rule of law versus the rule of force. Every territory must face this reckoning as it moves toward statehood." With Donovan in the lead, the assembled posse marched down the main street toward the Iron Horse Saloon. Curious onlookers watched from windows and doorways, sensing the tension in the air. Issac walked beside Catherine and Charlotte, having failed to convince them to remain behind. "Your place is with me," Catherine had insisted. "We face this together." The saloon fell silent as Donovan pushed through the swinging doors, followed by Judge Harlan, Issac, and the Keller sisters. The rest of the posse remained outside, surrounding the building. Rawlins sat at a corner table, a bottle of whiskey before him, surrounded by hard-faced men whose hands hovered near their weapons. "Victor Rawlins," Sheriff Donovan called, his voice steady despite the tension. "By the authority vested in me as Sheriff of Lincoln County, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson, attempted murder, and defiance of a lawful court order." Rawlins laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You don't have the backbone, Donovan, never did." "Perhaps not before," the sheriff admitted, "but things have changed." Rawlins' eyes narrowed as he took in the group before him, lingering with particular hatred on Issac and Catherine. "So the mighty citizens of North Platte have found their courage. How touching." He gestured expansively. "And what exactly do you think will happen here today?" Judge Harlan stepped forward. "What will happen, Mr. Rawlins, is that you will surrender yourself to the sheriff's custody and await trial for your crimes. Your men will lay down their weapons and leave this territory, never to return." "And if we refuse this generous offer," Rawlins sneered. "Then you'll face the consequences," Issac stated flatly. "Look outside, Rawlins. The whole town stands against you. This isn't a fight you can win even with your hired guns." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Rawlins' eyes as he glanced toward the windows, where he could see the assembled posse waiting. But his pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. "You think these shopkeepers and farmers scare me?" he scoffed, rising to his feet. "I built this town. I control its lifeblood. Without me, you'd all shrivel up and blow away in the wind." "That's where you're wrong," Catherine said, stepping forward despite Issac's protective hand. "This town, this valley, they don't belong to you. They belong to all of us who work the land, who built our homes here, who help our neighbors in times of need." Her voice rose with conviction. "You tried to take what wasn't yours, Mr. Rawlins. You tried to rule through fear, but today you learn that fear has its limits." A tense silence followed her words, broken only when one of Rawlins' men, a newer hire who didn't know the territory's history, reached for his gun. In an instant, Issac had drawn and fired, shooting the weapon from the man's hand before he could clear leather. "Next one won't be so merciful," Issac warned, his gun still raised. "Surrender now, Rawlins. It's over." Rawlins looked around at his men, seeing the calculation in their eyes. They were hired guns, not zealots. None of them were willing to die for his water rights or his pride. "Boss," one of them said quietly, "there's too many. This ain't worth dying for." The fight seemed to go out of Rawlins then. His shoulders sagged as he realized his empire was crumbling before his eyes. "Fine," he spat bitterly. "Arrest me. But this isn't justice, it's theft. That water is rightfully mine." "The court has ruled otherwise," Judge Harlan reminded him as Sheriff Donovan moved forward to take Rawlins into custody. "Your appeal, if you choose to make one, can be heard in a proper courtroom, not at gunpoint in a saloon." As Rawlins and his men were disarmed and led away, a cheer went up from the assembled townspeople. The threat that had hung over North Platte for so long was finally lifted, and a palpable sense of relief spread through the community. Later that evening, as celebrations continued throughout the town, Issac and Catherine found a quiet moment alone on the church steps, the very place where their story had begun. "It feels like a lifetime ago that you found us hiding here," Catherine mused, her hand warm in his. "So much has changed. For the better," Issac added, gazing at her profile in the soft twilight. "Catherine, there's something I've been wanting to ask you properly." He took both her hands in his, turning to face her directly. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Catherine's eyes filled with joyful tears. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. 1,000 times yes." Their kiss sealed the promise, a tender expression of the love that had grown between them amid danger and adversity. When they finally parted, Issac rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer except my hands, my heart, and a willingness to work hard for our future." "That's all I've ever wanted," Catherine assured him, her eyes shining. "That and someone who understands what the land means to me." "I understand," he promised. "The Triple K will always be your legacy, your father's dream. I'll help you build it into everything he hoped for." 2 months later, on a glorious autumn day, Issac and Catherine were married in the very church behind which he had found her and Charlotte hiding that stormy night. The newly rebuilt Keller ranch house was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons for the reception that followed, attended by nearly everyone in North Platte. The house itself stood as a testament to community spirit, larger and sturdier than the original, with special touches added by the many hands that had helped in its construction. Charlotte had her own room, though she had recently begun keeping company with Thomas Holloway, whose carpentry skills had proved invaluable during the rebuilding. Victor Rawlins had been transferred to Omaha to await trial, his empire dismantled, his political aspirations destroyed. Judge Harlan had ensured that the water rights for Beaver Creek were formally documented and protected, with fair access guaranteed for all neighboring ranches at reasonable rates. As Issac and Catherine shared their first dance as husband and wife in the newly built barn, surrounded by friends who had become family, Issac marveled at how dramatically his life had changed in just a few short months. From a solitary man seeking escape from his past, he had found purpose, community, and love, all because he had followed his instincts that stormy night and investigated a movement behind a church. "Happy?" Catherine asked, her head resting against his chest as they swayed to the fiddle music. "More than I ever thought possible," Issac replied honestly, tightening his arms around her. "And you?" She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting all the love and hope in her heart. I feel like our story is just beginning, and indeed it was. Over the years that followed, the Triple K flourished under their joint management. Issac's horse breeding operation gained renown throughout the territory, while Catherine's innovative approach to water management during drought years earned her respect far beyond Lincoln County. Charlotte eventually married Thomas Holloway, building their own home on a corner of the Keller property where the two families could remain close while maintaining their independence. Ezra retired from the way station business, moving into a small cabin on the ranch where he entertained his grandchildren with tales of the old days. 4 years after their wedding, Catherine gave birth to their first child, a son they named James after her father, followed 2 years later by a daughter they called Elizabeth, after Issac's mother. The children grew up strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and community from parents who had fought to preserve both. On summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were tucked into bed, Issac and Catherine would often sit on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. In those quiet moments, they would sometimes reflect on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found us that night?" Catherine asked on one such evening as they celebrated their 10th anniversary. Issac considered the question, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "I think we would have found each other anyway," he said finally. "Some things are just meant to be." And as the stars appeared in the darkening sky above the land they had fought for and the home they had built together, both knew in their hearts that he was right. Their love, like the land itself, had endured through fire and storm, emerging stronger and more vibrant than before, a testament to courage, faith, and the unbreakable bonds forged in adversity. In the years that followed, North Platte grew and prospered, eventually becoming part of the state of Nebraska. The Triple K Ranch remained a cornerstone of the community, passed down through generations of Xanders who never forgot the story of how their family began with a cowboy who found 2 sisters hiding behind a church and promised them safety under his roof for a night, never imagining it would lead to a lifetime of love and happiness on the wild frontier.